Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in business leaders with skin in the game who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability. With expert guests across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of wisdom, delving into their methods, their thinking and approach to life, business, and to problem solving. This is the Grande Cup of Insight, a long-form podcast interview where we take a little bit more time to delve a bit deeper into our guests' experience, stories, and get to those priceless nuggets for you. I'm your host, Al McBride, and my guest today is Paul Edwards. Paul is an executive ghostwriter, agency CEO, husband, father, amateur theologian, and bodybuilder, not to mention a best-selling author and host of Influencer Networking Secrets. So welcome to the show, Paul. It's great to have you on.
Al, it's so good to be here and so good to be with your audience, and thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure, I assure you. And let me just tell you, this is something that we touched on before, Paul, just to drop right into it. You mentioned this thing in your book, this idea of the curator, which is all about, choosing identity and habits, behavior, and your customers and your outcome. And this is from your book, as I said, the Influencer Networking Secrets. Can you dive into that for us? What do you mean by the curator?
I love the concept. We tend to think of a curator one of two ways. If you look it up online, you'll find that most of the time we're thinking about somebody who chooses certain pieces of artwork that go into a museum, or a display or a gallery. And in the other sense that it's used, people talk about choosing musical acts for a concert. And I thought, aren't those two very good analogies? Because one is very much kind of like stills, like moments, snapshots, right? Painted on canvas, not taken with a camera, but they're still, just images and pictures and representations of what your life is. And the other one is very much in motion, right? It's songs being played. It's usually captured on video. Yes, there are photographers there, but it's very much an event with a sequence and a beginning and a middle and an end, which is the other equally important way to observe a human life.
Right.
So, to put it simply, I said, we have a choice. We always have a choice. It is never taken away from us. The one thing that we always have control over is the choice of how we respond. And that includes to responding to things inside ourselves and outside ourselves. And I took that and I said that forms the foundation. If you can choose who you're going to be, and by extension, who you're not going to be, then a lot of the other things that traditionally chaotically come in and out of your life will stop. They'll self-select out, right? To put it very simply, you choose not to live as a life of crime and live a life of obedience to the law. You'll stop having run-ins with the cops, right?
It's an interesting example to drop in there.
It's a very primitive one, but it was the first one I could think of.
Well, it's stark in the sense of that people tend to get the idea. I mean, the one thing I'd add to that, what you're saying is right on the nose, because it's one of those principles as a coach, as a trainer. It is fundamental to cognitive behavioral coaching, is the idea that, if you're in chaos and you feel somewhat out of control, the easiest way to get back into that is by asking that question, what do I have a choice on?
Yes.
What do I have? Because by the very definition of discovering that you're not just stuck, that you have a choice, means that you have some tiny modicum of control. And once you realize that, it starts the ball rolling for what else you might have a choice on, what else you have control on. That, as you said, that gets you back into where you have agency rather than being purely reacted upon by the world. So no, very, very interesting stuff. And I love the way you boil it back to this idea of knowing who you are, deciding who you are, as in, again, it's a choice.
Yeah.
This is profound stuff. I remember an old friend of mine used to say, when you have standards, people edit themselves in and out of your life,
Mm-hmm.
which is very similar to your concept. How do you apply this, or how do you help people apply this? So imagine there's a few bumps along the road.
Well, so as a matter of fact, just this morning, I was on a call with a very close friend and ally in business and in spiritual ally and all that. And he was talking to me about things that he says on a daily basis, affirmations and things that he finds very helpful in building up his higher self. And I was like, I'm all for that. However, I want to add, we also need to define who we're not. We also need to say right from the get-go. And I inferred this, oddly enough, Al, not from the practice of doing self-affirmations. I first discovered it. I've been a fan for a long time of Craig Ballantyne, who's a well-known business coach and author. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this thing. I don't know that he originally came up with it, but he was a big proponent of having a to-do list and also having a not to-do list, right?
I've heard this from Tim Ferriss. He loves the not to-do list. Yeah.
Yeah. So the minute you begin articulating that stuff, the reality all around you begins to say, oh, okay, now he or she is exercising the authority that he has over what he's going to do and what he's not going to do, and that is going to communicate subconsciously, I believe, to the people around you, so that they begin to self-edit in and out. And so as a result, time wasters are a very rare thing for me to actually interact with, not just because of COVID-19. It was that way before, right? It was I would just go places, meet people, and it didn't take long after a few minutes of talking to me for most people who spend an inordinately greater amount of time doing wasteful things to not really want to go that far with me. And I'm not knocking them. I'm not praising myself. I'm saying one is one and the other's the other, and they're different. Right? They're just different. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And so what I tell people most of the time is, if you don't know who you're not, you can't really know who you are. It's the way we were. If you believe the way I believe, it's the way we were created. It's written right there in Genesis, but we don't necessarily know how to interpret it because it was originally written in Hebrew. But the lesson is actually sitting there in stark contrast. This is who. First, you got to know who you're not. Once you know that, you can find out who you are.
Mm-hmm. And just on that, who you are and who you're not idea, it's something, as I said, in the bio there is very interesting, that there's a lot of roles. As I said, father, husband, agency CEO, executive ghostwriter. We'll dive into a few of those. And I'm just, because it's something you mentioned about the bodybuilder part, that identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you mentioned to me when we were chatting before about, when you know or accept, or as you say, choose that identity, all the behavioral change just sort of slots into place, really, doesn't it? This was something I've discovered recently. Sorry, not so much discovered. I was reminded of when I was helping a friend's PhD intern study thing, and it was about behavior change. It was one of these things, but you had to write down your values first, and then the supposed the new habit that you wanted to form was a habit change. And it was instantaneous for weeks. It's no problem, because it just, once it's over the value, it's a lot easier to just keep doing the habit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and once right, what in many cases, not all the time, but what turns you off or what irritates you or what is creates a vacuum internally for you. Right. One of my values is words matter. And the reason I know that words matter, aside from having a gift with words, is that when I see people poorly using words, it irritates it irritates me to no end. When I see misspellings or bad grammatical uses or things taken out of context or primitive interpretations, I'm just like, ugh, makes my, my skin starts to crawl.
Right.
So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
No, not at all. Not at all. That was a very interesting thought. I was just going to go onto the bodybuilder element for a moment, as to it's a very interesting addition to, as I said, the CEO part and indeed the ghostwriter part. I'm just wondering how they all inform each other, particularly maybe those three.
one of the things I discovered when I went through this, I've been through a couple transformations, physical, in my life. The first time I was young and in my very early 20s, and I lost about probably 60 pounds. And it was, I couldn't have told you this, couldn't have even understood it at the time. But the thing that began to happen for me was that everywhere I went, people seemed to pay so much more attention to me and take me so much more seriously than they used to. Obviously, there was a big improvement in my ability to capture the attention of the opposite sex because of this, right? At the time. Right. I went from being, 230 pounds and flabby face and big belly and all that. And now I'm like lean and tanned from living in Southern California and, tight jaw and all that kind of thing. And, it did what it did. Well, I did a second time through that at age 37, but by this time I'm married and 2 kids. It's not about attracting girls or anything, but it's about, but I'm also much more spiritually attuned to what's going on. And I can tell that when I do these things for my body, my soul is saying, I like that. Keep doing that. I feel better now. I don't feel angry and bitter and sarcastic and defeatist all the time because of what you're doing. You're winning, right? You're winning the battle with yourself. And you can do that in other areas. So up until this point, I had been working jobs that, quite frankly, I didn't want to work. And this was when I began to move into being an entrepreneur. I couldn't see myself spending the rest of my life just working for barely above the minimum wage, because I hadn't chosen the modern, lucrative technological profession where it's a fair degree easier to get a great paying job.
Right.
So all this is happening, and I'm realizing as all this is going on, I'm realizing the body and the soul are talking to each other. They're communicating. Like I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very Irish-like weather here. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
And I for years, I just detested the climate, and I was vocal about it to my wife and to anybody who would listen. But I could tell that people were kind of turned off by that, even though it is a pretty gloomy climate. And it didn't do me any good. And I started going and sitting in saunas and hot tubs just to feel warm and, like I was back in Southern California or something.
Right.
And my soul would say, that's good. Do more of that. Do more of that. There's no harm in taking an extra 30 minutes and soaking and absorbing some heat. So these things just began to play off of each other. And I lost, I went from 26.5% body fat to 11.3. And I was like, I'm like at 37, right? I'm dropping from size 38 waist to size 34, and my abs are showing, and I'm, flexing and getting muscles and all this kind of thing. And I made the decision that I was going to try, and just to see what it was like to compete in men's physique in a bodybuilding competition.
Right.
And I went after it. And the more I did it, you can train for a long time, or some people can do contest prep in a matter of, a few weeks. In my case, I just spent a whole bunch of time training. I learned how to hit the bodybuilder poses. I learned how to fix my nutrition properly. I learned how to get good tanning done. I learned, I did a photo shoot. I did all this stuff. And at the end of it, I found myself saying, this is who I am. Right now, I'm not competing these days. I've got way too much business to attend to, but I maintain myself in a position where I could pay my coach, for 3 months of contest prep coaching. I could shed that, 4 percentage points of body fat I need to get into show competition. I know how to get the tan. I know how to hit the poses, right? And especially I know how I eat. I know what I'm eating, and I know what I refuse to eat. And so it's just like, it's who I am. So, we go to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I eat the meal, but I don't, there's stuff on that table. I'm sorry, I'm not touching it. Okay. I don't care how good it tastes, and I don't care that it's Christmas or Thanksgiving. I'm not interested.
And what is it? What is it about it? Is it the self-discipline? Is it, because it sounds, you talk to it and it's connected. It sounds like it's connected to kind of a spiritual edge to it. And I'm just wondering what aspect of it in that is connected to the spiritual for you.
The American patriot Patrick Henry was arguing before, this is an answer to the question. Sure. The American patriot Patrick Henry was arguing before the Continental Congress about the way that King George and the Parliament were treating the American colonies. And he said, where can you show me in the last 10 years that the British have done anything but tax us more, quarter their soldiers in our houses, abuse us, overregulate us, just establishing tyranny over us? Right. When in the last 10 years has anyone ever seen them do something truly benevolent towards us? And of course, nobody could answer, well, they did this and they did that. And, nobody answered that. Everybody knew. He was stating what everybody knew. I look at food the same way, right? When in the last 10 years has a glass of scotch or, a big old hot dog or a birthday cake or an apple pie or whatever, when has that ever led to muscular gains, leaner abs, greater cardiovascular endurance? Doesn't do it. Tastes good going in for about 30 seconds. That's it. Now, I'm not a foodie, so I'll say that, right? A lot of people are foodies and that kind of thing. I'm not. I'm easily detached from it. But part of the reason I'm detached from it is because I'm able to ask that question. I'm able to say, I can't remember the last time a slice of apple pie did me any more good than a couple of seconds of dopamine, and that was it. And that's not enough to do it for me anymore.
Okay, it's an interesting perspective. Just as you said, the filter is very clear as to the perspective on that thing, what the meaning of it is for you. I'm just wondering how that then relates to your ghostwriting. Mm-hmm. So before we quite get in there, I'm just intrigued as to how someone gets into ghostwriting. So can you talk to us about that, as to your path into there? Was it very circuitous?
It was, yeah. Not something, I always thought it was a pretty cool profession. It was not something that I had on my radar.
Right.
But here's the thing. I realized that I had been doing ghostwriting for quite some time before I actually took up a pen and got paid to do it as a professional.
Right.
And this is what my book is all about. It's called Influencer Networking Secrets, but if you think about it, it's just like being a ghostwriter.
Okay, that's interesting.
Well, there's really only two ways that networking does what you really want it to do, right? Going one direction is what everybody obviously wants, which is other people are recommending and referring you.
Right.
Going the other direction, you are referring and recommending them and creating credibility and authority and visibility, right?
Sure.
Sort of like you and I are doing by interviewing on each other's shows.
Sure.
And I thought about that and I said, what is it? People have, I don't know how many great customers, strategic partnerships, opportunities for publicity I've created. I've lost count of them. Long since lost count of them. I was doing it way before I had a podcast or had a book or anything like that. I was doing it in the insurance business here locally where I live. I said, I have been taking people's messages and transmitting them to other people for years.
Right.
So I'm ghostwriting what they offer, how they offer it, who they are as a person, etc. I am taking that and transmitting it to other people who want to buy it or who want to know about it, right? And I'm saying you should meet this person.
Okay.
Going the other direction, they are taking my value that I imprint upon them through interacting with them, and they are selling me to their friends and their network and anybody they come across who needs what I do. So I had been ghostwriting my marketing message long before I ever picked up a pen and got paid to do it.
All right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Although I'd still wonder that there's an extra element there in the ghostwriting, because people can write, good PR people, good marketing people can write good copy for a client. But for me, that's kind of a different animal to actually being able to write in the other person's voice. That seems like a whole other level, particularly as you mentioned, and as several of your clients mentioned, that the only way their friends and family could tell the difference was that yours often sounded more succinct, or it was more punchy, or whatever. It was just better, better than they could say themselves. But the friends and family would hear their loved one's voice. That was the key thing. So that for me is a whole other level. So I'm just wondering, how do you get into that, the mindset and the perspective of your client?
You're absolutely right to point that out. This one, I wish I could claim the credit for it. I can describe it, but I can't say that it's anything other than a gift from God. So all my life, I have been gifted with two things: words and people. So when I was growing up, I would, it's about 6, 7 years old. I saw my dad sitting at his computer keyboard typing furiously one day. And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? And he said, I'm writing my autobiography.
Right.
And I didn't know what it was. So when he told me, he said, it's the story of my life. I said, oh, that's cool. And I decided I was going to write my autobiography. And
Okay.
he had taught me how to use the word processor, but I hadn't used it up until that point, until I got the inspiration to write a story.
Okay.
So I went and, of course, as any 7 or 8 year old boy can, told my story in an autobiography. And from then on, I had the writing bug. So at 11, I was following the sports section of the Los Angeles newspaper, and I was into hockey, ice hockey, and I would read the stories recounting the games and the box scores and all that. And so long before fantasy sports was ever a thing, I had my own hockey fantasy league that I created all on my own with all the teams and the rosters and all the box scores and highlights and all that. I wrote it all. That's preternatural. It's just what was inside me, and I didn't even really understand it at the time. When you talk about the voice, though, that's the mimic. So the other thing that I started doing naturally, and which, since I'm on an Irish podcast, I can demonstrate, was I started listening to stand-up comedy routines.
Okay.
And I think I was 9 years old, my dad had heard me walking around. I listened to an entire Hal Roach, Irish, the King of Blarney, in Jury's Hotel in Dublin.
Right.
I would walk around telling his jokes to make my mom laugh and that kind of thing. My dad knew that I knew the whole routine. He asked me to get up in front of all of our friends. We were gathered together for a family's 3 or 4 different families get together. And he said, do your Irish routine. And I got up and did it and had them all rolling. All the adults were laughing. All the kids were laughing. So since I'm on an Irish podcast, that reminds me of my new favorite Hal Roach joke. He said, I think me wife has turned me to religion. I never knew what hell was until I was married to her.
Right. Nice one. Excellent. So when you're working with a client, then how much exposure do you need to talk with them at length? Do you need to read what they've written before? I mean, what's do you have a particular approach, or does it vary due to the client? How does that work?
There's plenty of research you can do. when you're writing, particularly a nonfiction book for a client.
Right.
That can tell you generally what the audience wants to hear. That's the one side of it. If you don't maintain the presence of mind to say, I've got to remember we're writing to an audience, we want them to respond, you can quickly get lost in the weeds. But backing up a step from that, when you're when you're with a client, when I'm with a client, this is where in my book I tell people to become like a therapist.
Right.
So you've really got to spend time digging into that story. And the deeper I dig with clients, the more, and I can tell usually I watch when they're talking, and then all of a sudden I begin to hear a slightly higher inflection in their voice, and maybe their eyes light up or they start really getting animated. And I'm like, we found something here. We've got something. So I'm taking scrupulous notes, right? Taking dictation as I go. But I'm also, it's also a tremendous listening game. It's a game that requires tremendous restraint from talking too much, talking too soon, not talking enough, right? Mm-hmm. And it's magic. So I don't find that I have to. I don't find that it takes me too long to find their voice, particularly if I know who they're after, the audience that they're trying to reach, if I know a lot about what they do or what their offer is. Right. It's just really, and of course, I record all the interviews. I take detailed notes. I make, just write paragraphs of their stories, right? That they're recounting as they recount them. And then I say, okay, how do I take that and plug and play it with what the research indicates the audience wants to hear?
Okay, that's very interesting, just to say that you balance it or weight it so much by the audience expectation.
Oh, yeah.
So you're already almost pre-editing the thing as to what should go in, what should the main topics, where to put the focus. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, because otherwise you're writing a book that nobody's going to want to read.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
It's great to have a good title. I get that. And that's probably one of the easier parts. It's time consuming to take it, but once you got it, you don't have to write anything else. But writing all the content, turning it into a thing that makes people turn the page and wow, I can't put this down. Now that's, yeah, that takes a lot
challenge.
Yeah.
So tell us something. Have you found some of the most common myths or misunderstandings about that profession?
About ghostwriting?
Yeah.
I heard it beautifully from a client recently. He said, my impression of a ghostwriter is you pay them money and they sit and write down what you say. And that's it.
He's like, yeah, we have computer programs to do that now. Otter.ai does it for me.
Barely.
That's the thing. I presume you add a whole other dimension, which you've just described with the focus on the editing and yeah.
And it's more than that. So I politely said, well, that's certainly part of it. That's the foundational building blocks, no question. However, I think this is better stated, Al, in terms of what you lose when you don't use one. So here's the thing. You and I we're separated by tens of thousands of miles of ocean and land. However, when I look into my screen here, I can see you've got your head canted slightly to the side. You're smiling a little bit, right? I see the books behind you. I see the light switch. There's context to what you're saying. There's a rhythm. There's a pace at which you talk. There's your accent. There's your tone. There's all this stuff, which only gets amplified and magnified if you and I are actually physically face to face.
Right.
But now we're talking in print. Now you're losing all of that. Right? You're losing the tonality, you're losing the inflection, you're losing the body language, you're losing the subconscious communication, the nonverbal stuff that's taking place and we don't even know it. And all you've got is a white piece of paper or a screen with a bunch of words on it. How do you get that person to keep reading? To the point that they say, this guy knows his stuff. I've got to get in contact with him. I need him to help me solve this problem.
Right.
It's totally the opposite, right? It's Yes, I write. I've got chops with words. Yes, I've got a great team. Yes, I've got a great publishing team, great editors, great people who help me, all of that. But it's not about that. It's what you are going to lose doing it by yourself. That deprives your audience of the creativity that they deserve, that compels them to read that book.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Because I was going to ask about what, some of those common mistakes, if people are trying to write their own book, because it is quite it's an increasingly popular thing these days. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, and that's certainly one of the big ones, which is that an awful lot of their actual voice, that if they were doing a video series, strangely enough, might actually come across more easily to the audience. Whereas, as you say, when you strip it all back into just words on a page, what are you actually left with? So that's a very interesting point. I'm just wondering, is there anything else that what other elements are either added or subtracted? Because it's just, I have a feeling that when you're ghostwriting, as you said, you can take what the individual is, for want of a better phrase, trying to say, or saying, but maybe not as eloquently as a professional writer would.
Yep.
Are you kind of, dare I say it, giving the Hollywood treatment to the biography?
It's not an unfair or way off base analogy there. And the reason I say that is a great mentor of mine once had this quote, story is the language of the heart. Right? So when you and your best friends get together, right, and you haven't seen each other for a while, what do? You tell stories, right? Hey, how's it going? Oh man, you're not going to believe what happened to my car. You're not going to believe what happened the other day that I ran into this, and that's what we do.
Right.
And that's why salespeople, sales coaches, you'll hear them say things like facts tell and stories sell. Right. Right. We're not ignoring or neglecting the intellect. We're just saying that that's not all there is to it. It's both. Right. There's an emotional component and there's an intellectual component. And to human beings, I believe, are living, breathing stories. And so stories interacting with other stories want to know, among other things, what's the story? What's the progression? How did you get to where you are? Why does it make, what's the sequence? And all of that goes back to, Al, is arranging. It's a bit like a composer would arrange a symphony, right? You can put the middle eight right at the beginning, but then it's not the middle eight, right? These are musical terms. Not everybody, maybe not everybody recognizes them. I was in concert choir in high school, so I remember them. But you can put the denouement of a story at the beginning, and sometimes it does make sense to put it there because you're telling the story retrospectively. But for most of the time, you want to build toward it on a crescendo, because that's what keeps those pages turning. And so there's an arranging element there that I think most people are most people are thinking it's a dictating machine. I just write as I speak. I just write stream of consciousness. And if we're listening to you speak through a microphone, if we're watching you speak, you can get away with more of that. But if we're reading a book, you can't. Because the eyes are processing that. They're passing the information to the ears, which are doing the audio processing. But the eyes are so much easier to dupe than the ears, right? So when you're writing those words, you've got to be able to pull back from it. You've got to get extra sets of eyes on it. And if you ask me, there's no real creativity without at least two human beings, right? Nobody publishes. I mean, well, I suppose some people do, but nobody truly self-publishes a book. They might write it, they might not make many changes to it, but most people at least hire an editor, right? And if they don't do a ghostwriter, so there's always a filter through which that's got to pass.
Right.
I say you might as well add more filters, because the more filters you add, the more creativity emerges, the more vocabulary emerges, the more expressions and interesting ways of saying things, and figurative illustrations that help a broader cross-section of readers comprehend what you're saying emerge.
It's a very interesting point. A colleague of mine often used the phrase, you can't read the jar when you're inside it.
Uh-huh.
You can't read the label when you're inside the jar, you know, and it's that sort of idea that you can't see the wood from the trees, that, as you said, when you've experienced it, a lot of things seem obvious to you, but when you have someone else filter that and go, that doesn't make sense. What are you trying to say here? What's going on with that? Yeah, okay. So
especially in print.
Especially in print. Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Who do you tend to prefer to work with as an ideal client? What's your criteria there?
My most fluent language is in the personal and professional development space of faith-based coaches, consultants, masterminds, executives, people who are creating virtuous workplace cultures, people who are helping get the best results out of other human beings.
Right.
Not through slave driving, obviously, but through building up and edifying them.
Excellent. And on the kind of almost the flip of that, I'm always interested particularly when people have been in an industry and have learned a lot of lessons over many years. I'm often interested in their red flags. What are some of those little things? The little things seem quite, on positive, and then there's something that just bing, and they think, oh, hold on a second. What might be some of those red flags for you at nearly any point in that process be? And I presume one of them is that, their, as I said, their workplace culture that they've created isn't as humane, isn't maybe as values based. But I'm just wondering, what are some of those other little red lights or red flags that fire for you?
Politics, divisive stuff.
Okay.
So not that I think that there's no merit to a political manifesto, making clear what your ideology or that is, but I work in the world of business. I operate in the world of business, which is very much, and the way I operate is not transactional. It's very relational and very cooperative. And to some extent, there's some of that in politics too. There's horse trading and backroom deals, negotiations, and that kind of stuff goes on. But for the most part, particularly for the time we live in, I find it's just not worth the money. I would much rather make friends and plant seeds with people with whom I disagree than come directly at them and attack how they think. Do I disagree with them? Absolutely, no question. But but is that what's most important to me? No, I'm on a mission, and that mission is based on a view of that I'm a resident on a planet in a universe which at its core has a being whose core identity is love. And so I don't want, it's quite obvious from the last 20 or 30 years, but especially the last 3 or 4, that walking around bashing each other over the head for thinking differently is not working.
Not so much.
So it's time to try something a little bit different, and maybe just learn to love and let other people live the way they do.
I'm just also curious on, because I said you've had quite a career so far, and you've quite a few different roles. But I'm always curious with people as to what they see as some of their more formative or instructive failures or setbacks in their career that either they learned a huge lesson from, or maybe made them pivot their career path, that kind of thing.
So many to choose from, Al, but I'll I'll say this. When I experienced my first transformation, physical transformation, That was shortly before I took advantage of the fact that my dad is a British citizen and he bequeathed to me a UK passport. And so I came and lived in England for a while.
Right.
And while I was there, I made the decision, a couple of really important decisions. I made one decision that I was just going to make physical fitness a lifestyle, and that has stuck with me now for 18 years. The other decision I made was that I was going to go into whatever position would give me a shot to work and earn my own keep, and I was going to serve my butt off. And that worked, and that started out, and that's how I got some really good traction for quite some time, and was starting to, feel like I could spend, a long time living in London. I was very happy there and was making great friends. But eventually, I got to a point where I wanted to move into the sales side of what I was doing. I had been in customer service and I wanted to do sales. And they just dilly-dallied. My opinion was that they were dilly-dallying in getting me, in cross-promoting me. I didn't fully appreciate the talent that I brought to customer service and the way I distinguished myself from my colleagues, which was why they had promoted me 4 times in customer service. Mm-hmm. But I just thought I was, well, if I can do that, then I can do sales. And they took so long, and I started to become prideful and arrogant. And I thought, they're not promoting me fast enough. Don't they know who I am? I mean, it's 22 years old, right? I'm they've promoted me 4 times in customer service. I'm the bee's knees, man. And it set off a chain reaction that for until the beginning of 2020, so 1 year ago at the time of recording, until the beginning of 2020, I really had no idea why my professional life just was a shambles. I joined the military not long after this prideful decision because I couldn't keep a job and I couldn't stop getting fired from them. So I said, well, the military won't let you quit and they won't fire you. So there's a safe place for a few years while I learn some hard lessons, But it didn't stop. I came out of the military. I got a degree, got a job, and got fired after 90 days. And that was what drove me into the insurance business. And the insurance business was the first time I stuck with the job for a while, and I didn't get fired from my first job. I left it because I got a better one. And the same thing happened with my second job. I also left that one because I found a better one. But the third one, I got fired again. And I said, I don't know what it is, but I've got a journey to go on here. And that's why I became an entrepreneur. So hard lessons is, there's a reason pride is number 1 on the list of the 7 deadly sins.
Right.
And I'm living proof of it. I'm a redeemed egomaniac, as one of my mentors has called me. And, maybe it sounds kind of casual for me to say that, like most people would be terrified of admitting to it, but I'm not. I've sort of embraced it and run with it and said, of all the mistakes I made, becoming proud and arrogant and thinking too highly of myself was tops the list.
And was that a gradual change, or was there one particular moment where things suddenly flipped?
You mean in coming out of it, or?
Yeah. There
was a season, this entrepreneurial journey, the first 17 months, I didn't make a dime, nothing, zero income, nothing. Nobody was interested. Nobody would give me the time of day. And I didn't know what the problem was. But in 2019, in the late summer, getting into the early autumn, I decided, well, I don't know what the problem is here, but one thing I knew I had not tried was fasting. And not fasting like, not eating anything till sundown just for the heck of it. I'm like, I want answers to this. I need to know what my problem is. And I can't find it until I purposefully deprive myself of things that normally distract me. So I went on like a 7-day social media fast, shut off, didn't look at it, deleted all the apps off my phone, didn't look at it on my desktop, nothing. And I also went on it was a brief, like, water only fast for about 36 hours. It wasn't very long, but there was a few days connected to that where I only ate like once a day. And probably the third day, probably about halfway through or so, was when I read a lot of stuff, because when you're not eating, you have more time to read or do something else. So I was reading, and all of a sudden there was a section about pride in the book that I read. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I can usually tell that's the Spirit of God saying, that's your problem. You have lived out of pride for 2 decades, and it hasn't done you any good. And even though you're not nearly as obnoxiously arrogant as you used to be, you have to walk away from that. You have to curate that out of your system and say, that I'm not that man anymore. And there's nothing I will not do to avoid becoming him again.
And how long, looping back to the start about choosing who you are, and when you have that identity over the values, it can be very clarifying. Did you find that it was almost a click your fingers type of realization and a shift, or was it much more gradual then from that? Was there a lot of ups and downs?
There was a click in the sense that I understood in the depths of my being what the problem was. There was a process that I then had to go through to deconstruct that and clear away all the residual brush. Some of it, is not directly prideful stuff, but I'm still clearing it away today, because pride, any we call it sin, but you can call it any negative or destructive behavior that you get into, is never satisfied with just one area of your life. It wants to expand like a virus, and it bleeds over into other ones. And so just the other day, I was clearing away, I will not beat myself up verbally anymore. And not only will I not do that, but I'm not even going to leave that column blank. I'm going to fill it in with affirming, forgiving, merciful, kind things to say to myself. Because I have nothing to fear, I have nothing to hide, and I have nothing to prove. So I'm just, and that's the process. And that goes on. I don't know how long it'll go on, but it's still going on, to be perfectly honest.
It's a nice bridge actually into dealing with other people. Is that because you're dealing with clients, first of all, to do the deals and get those contracts to develop someone's book, usually an autobiography, right? And I'm just wondering, what are some of your insights in dealing with people, in making agreements, and in, I'd imagine you're very good at understanding other people, but is there a process also where they have to understand where you're coming from and what your needs are and how you can then best serve them? So I'm just wondering, how do you have a particular thoughts or insights on, first of all, making the deal and then actually the whole process?
Sometimes there are. Ghostwriting a book and getting it published and then book marketing, most of the time there is something of an expectation of a going rate. And of course, there are very high profile people who've done it for some of the most recognizable names in the world, and there you can probably charge quite a bit more in premium, right? And you can probably warrant it as well, just the same way I do. That is, I'm not in business only to make money. Making money and feeding my family is, of course, a priority in my business, but I also lead and mentor and teach a team of younger people who do a lot of fantastic work for me. I also lead and teach and mentor a group of young men in the church that I belong to. And I mentor younger people all the time. And I love helping them get over difficult things in their lives. And they love being around me because I have that heart. And all of that requires a certain level of a financial commitment, and therefore a decision on my part as to whether or not I can afford, quote unquote, to work with someone. And I'm just transparent about it, right? I'm like, I would love to help you, but if all you've got is $500, I can't do that. That's counterproductive. It's a lost leader for me. I might do it as a favor if it's a one-time thing, but I can't do it on an ongoing basis. I can't commit 3 months of, daily work and bringing in my research team and getting my publisher coordinated and getting all of that stuff squared up. That's me basically draining my bank account for somebody who doesn't really fit the bill.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting way of framing opportunity also. I mean, I understand, okay, if it's, as you said, if it's a favor or something, but it's just one of those things on setting your rates or setting your general standard of income for your work and your value of your work. It's very interesting, as I said, when you frame it in terms of, if I choose you, I can't help someone properly better, and where that income for me goes, there's then a cost there. Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective. Just as we're closing up here, is there one question I should have asked you that would be great value to some of the listeners?
You have fulfilled the renowned reputation of the Irish to carry on a fantastic conversation, Al. I can't think of anything at the moment.
Well, that's very flattering. Cheers, Paul. Thank you for that. So if people want to learn a bit more about you, if they want to even get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I have a website. If you are considering a ghostwriting project, there's a whole section on there devoted to it. And the website is thepaulS, as in Simon, Edwards.com, thepaulsedwards.com. And it's same on social media. If you want to reach out to me that way, I'm on all the big ones. My handle is @thepaulsedwards. Those would be the two best ways I can think of.
Okay. Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you. Very interesting getting all those insights. As I said, I'm a big fan of having, as I said, that identity stack, from the values and the spiritual side on all the way up to, and as you said, it just makes, when people struggle with behavior change or habit change, it's often because they're trying to do something that's not connected. It's not connected enough. So
you got to go further upstream. That's right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Paul. Super to have you on the show, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Great to be here, Al. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.